Okay, great. So it looks like we have everyone. Before we get started, the meeting is already recording, but I'm just going to ask that everyone who's not a panelist, if you could please turn your video and your mics off, just to make it a little bit easier. I think we can go ahead and get started. So I guess our first question overall is, can each of you, the panelists, introduce yourselves? And so that would just include, like, in the spirit of this panel, introduce yourself with your pronouns, and then just a brief overview of your work in innovation that you've been doing over quarantine. So we can start with Shreya and Saffron.
Hi, I'm Shreya. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi, I'm Saffron. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a 10th grader from Boston and the co-founder of Letters Against Isolation. Letters Against Isolation is an organization whose goal is to send seniors around the US letters and cards filled with joy.
During these difficult times, we've been spotlighted by numerous national news outlets, including The Washington Post, NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, and ABC News. We've written 50,000 letters to 7,000 seniors nationwide, and we're excited to continue growing.
Okay, great. Can we move on to Dr. Suliman?
All right. Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Sara Suliman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an immunologist by training, and I also have some training in public health. My work so far has been on TB clinical trials for vaccine candidates, and also on discovering biomarkers that predict TB disease. And as of March or April, I joined the COVID Innovation Center, which was a joint effort by Mass General Hospital and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, which has a diagnostics pillar. So I've joined as a volunteer, and now I'm directing the lab that actually validates new diagnostics for COVID. I'm happy to talk more about that.
Great. And then the Bootmans.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. Thank you for having us here. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this is my partner, Isaac.
Hi, I'm Isaac.
He led the charge to produce over 3 million face shields.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I guess our next question is, was there we can continue like following in the same order. Was there a specific moment or story throughout like your history that you remember that specifically led you to your work?
Definitely. I would say that at the beginning of March, when lockdown began, I had just finished school. It was just before my spring break. And my sister and I, who grew up in England, still have grandparents who live there, and they were self-isolating in their homes alone. And our grandmother is a very social person. She attends the gym every day with her friends. And given that she was now on lockdown in her own home, she was having trouble with not being able to interact with her friends. And so Shreya and I were thinking of ways to reach out to her and help her through this difficult time. But before we could even come up with a solution, she had solved the problem herself. One of her friends had sent her a card, and it brought her an enormous amount of joy. She kept sending us pictures of it and reading it to us, and she always had a huge smile on her face. And so Shreya and I thought, well, why don't we reach out to other local care homes and see if we can write to their seniors? And we expected that maybe 1 or 2 of them would reply, and maybe we would write to 10 or 20 seniors. But before the end of the week, we had 200 seniors eagerly awaiting cards, and we knew that we had to send them all letters and cards. And so we started to recruit friends, family, and volunteers from all over the US to deliver cards to those seniors, and now many thousands of more seniors.
Dr. Suliman.
All right, was I next? Sorry. I suppose like when the pandemic started, that was a time that obviously created a lot of confusion to all of us, and each one of us wanted to contribute in whatever way we were that we wanted to, but that we had skills to actually lend to support with the pandemic control efforts. So I specifically felt that, as someone who is trained as an infectious disease immunologist and also have a master's in public health, I felt this urgency that I needed to lend my skills, but I didn't know how. Initially, I'm connected with a network of African scientists, and the initial efforts were just basically writing op-ed pieces about what needed to happen in terms of national response. But it really felt inadequate, and it also felt divorced from the skills that I have as an immunologist. I tried to plug it into different structures that we're already doing some work for pandemic preparedness. The hospital had multiple town halls to discuss, first of all, that there's a crisis looming, and secondly, for opportunities for people to volunteer. So when I saw there were multiple pillars for the innovation center, so one of them was PPE, one was diagnostics, one was therapeutics. So when I saw the diagnostics one, I said, well, I specifically have training in biomarker discovery. That would be a nice way to volunteer. And I never actually anticipated that my role would evolve. I just thought, I have skills that I can lend as a volunteer. But as people started going back to work, there has been some pandemic fatigue, and we lost a lot of volunteers in the different working groups. So naturally, there was an opportunity for me to take up a bigger leadership role at that point. So that's what I've been doing so far.
That sounded absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Suliman. And next will be Bowman Industries.
Sure. So we have been in contact with China because we manufacture 3D printers. And early in January, they had been messaging us saying, I'm so sorry, we can't ship out X, Y, and Z. The coronavirus has hit us. We're all in lockdown. And this is January. We didn't think twice about it. So come March, they haven't responded. Now the coronavirus has come to the United States, and it's really hit us. So on March 17th,
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, our county executive opened up a testing center here in upstate New York. And we looked at each other and we said, look, we have access to a lot of 3D printers. What can we do to help? So we put all of our other work aside, and we just focused on our efforts for the coronavirus. And we saw that there was a shortage in PPE, and we said, why don't we 3D print a face shield? So we decided to print a couple face shields, give them to our county executive. He came back to us and he said, look, I see you're 50. Can you print 200 more?
This was kind of a whole new ballgame for us. We make printers. We don't make medical equipment. And so this was like, well, sure, I guess we could make 200 more. So we started to make 200 more, and the local paper wrote about it.
And then from that, other newspapers wrote about it, and more people were emailing us. I think we sat down for lunch one day and then looked at our phones, and there was hundreds of emails from two different groups. One group was, I'm in dire need of these face shields. I'm a hospital, I'm an organization. We absolutely need these.
And then the other really cool part of that was the second group of people emailing were people with 3D printers. And they were like, hey, I have a 3D printer. I'm sitting at home right now. Can I help? Can I help print shields? And we kind of had to take a look around and go, oh my God, there's no way we can meet all these demands. I mean, in the first couple of hours, I remember Guadalajara, Mexico emailed us, Japan, Colorado, California, and we were just, making them here in our little workshop. And we're like, there's no way we can ship these all over the world. But the great thing about 3D printing is, you know, you can upload a file and anywhere in the world you can make that file.
So that's exactly what we did. We uploaded our file, and on our website, we had 2 different forms. One was, if you are a hospital, if you are in need of face shields, you can request them here. And then the other one was, I want to help, I have a 3D printer, and download the face shield file here. And so go ahead.
I think it was in the first week we had 30,000 downloads and 3,000 people signed up globally to start making these things, which sounds like a lot, but the requests within the first 2 weeks were around 250,000 face shields. And so that's a lot of work for, you know, 3,000 registered people to produce. And, you know, the beautiful thing about it is these weren't companies. These were libraries, public libraries, where the librarians had access to printers. They were moms and dads with their kids sitting around their dining room table printing these things. They were
13-year-olds in the Netherlands that we had never contacted before, never met before, emailing us saying, I want to help, I want to help. So it was such a magical moment, connecting these two, the people who were in dire need to the people that could help.
So if we got a request from, you know, Mobile, Alabama, we looked on our map of registered producers and we connected them to everyone in their geographic area. And so they would be able to, you know, print them and drive them to the hospital and drop them off. By the end of June, globally, the Budman face shield had been made 3 million times and distributed across the planet.
Nice. Thank you so much, you guys. And I think our next question would just be, you know, to what extent would you say that gender or sexuality plays in your field, if any? And anybody can go first, yeah.
I'm so sorry, Marie, you cut out for me. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, so the question was, to what extent would you say that gender or sexuality play in your field, if anything at all?
So I am a young woman in tech. I took a gap year before matriculating to college. And in that time, I worked for 3 different startups of various different sizes. And I didn't see another woman once. I didn't work with one other woman. And I think it would be easy to fall into thinking that since I don't see anyone like myself, any women or many people of color, I don't belong in that space. And I think I was lucky to have the confidence to believe that's not true, to push past those perceived boundaries and to know that I can do those innovative things and I can do interesting things. And from experiencing that sense of otherness, we've worked very hard with Letters Against Isolation. We want to create a very inclusive environment where volunteers are welcome and where they feel valued, regardless of age, sex, gender, background. And so we've worked so hard to exhibit this warm and welcoming nature through our correspondence with volunteers, as well as through connecting with them on Facebook and over virtual events.
I can go next. Okay. So I'm a cis heterosexual woman, so sexuality hasn't really played that much, as much as just being a woman and a woman of color, not only a woman of color, but also a Black woman during this period of both the coronavirus epidemic and the police brutality on Black people. And the intersectionality of that played in many different ways. So specifically in terms of response to COVID, one of the main issues that has been highlighted by a lot of female scientists specifically is that whenever there's a press release or media interviews, or even the government is calling on experts to actually advise them, women tend to be the last on that list, even though they are actually doing the majority of the work. I don't have any children myself, but of course, you know, childcare and other domestic work, that when people moved to working from home arrangements, became such a burden on women that on top of doing that, they're being silenced and their voices are not heard as much. So one of the main issues that happened during the pandemic is in scientific review and also in media, there are usually equity standards or committees that actually pay attention to the demographic of who's actually being interviewed, who's being highlighted. But because during a crisis situation, everything is happening at such a fast pace, those checks are not, people are not paying attention to them as much, are not spending as much time analyzing the demographics, analyzing the equity of who's actually being represented and what voices are being heard. And because we are in a crisis situation, we're expected to perform the labor, and because women needs of the collective, we end up doing a lot more labor, but also with less acknowledgement and with less representation. So because of the, coincidentally, because of the discussions around race and representation that happened, you know, a few months after the start of the pandemic, I think people started to get it, but still the representation is not on side of, ensuring that both women and, you know, people of color are being represented in the media. So the way it's showing up in COVID work is that, you know, there's a lot more labor and less representation, but more and more, I think people are making a statement, especially because, you know, Black communities or communities of color in general are being hit hardest by the pandemic. That sentiment is becoming more strongly represented now, and people are putting more effort into making sure that people who look like me are actually having a voice at the table. But it took a while, and the imposter syndrome at the beginning of the pandemic hit hard. I mean, nobody's an expert. Nobody knew about COVID, you know, a year ago because it didn't exist. But it's interesting to see who felt they could be experts right away, which is predominantly cis white men. But it took us a lot longer to feel the same. Well, I wouldn't even say the same, but to feel some level of confidence to actually be represented and to speak on the issue comfortably.
I would have to agree with both of your answers. Isaac and I are a team, so that means that we go into every single meeting together, we work together, we meet manufacturers together, and I'm gonna say 99% of the time we're talking to other men. We are in manufacturing facilities, which is mainly men, and we're in an environment where we make 3D printers, like the one behind me. And the people who tend to buy 3D printers are also mainly men. So when we go into these meetings, the men usually will talk to Isaac and disregard me. And so the meeting goes along and I have inputs. I will say what I need to say. And then by the end of the meeting, they trust me. And then so the conversation is more evolved. It's not just Isaac and the other people, it's now I'm included as well.
It's interesting to walk into those meetings because they assume I'm the one who knows the business stuff and I don't. I'm the technical end of our team. Steph is the 51% owner of the business who runs all of everything. And so when we're walking in, I'm usually just there to answer technical questions. She's the one running the meeting. And so it's sort of interesting to watch because we walk in and they start talking to me and I don't know what they're talking about. She's the one who knows what they're talking about. And it's interesting to watch that dynamic shift each time because inevitably it shifts. And I mean, usually we're the youngest people in the room at about 30 years of age, with people who are, 50 and 60 and have had a lifetime of that kind of culture. And so it's always an interesting dynamic to observe.
So we need to change that culture. We need to have more women in tech, more women in design, more women in 3D printing, more women in STEAM, and more women running the world. But going on to during the height of COVID-19, when we were making face shields, we ran this little organization of volunteers at a soundstage near our house. And we had volunteers from every race, every age, and it was just so wonderful to see women who were nurses come in and help make face shields. Vets who had served in Korea and Vietnam come in and make face shields. And it was this just amalgamation of faces and ages all coming together, working in unison. And that's where we should go as a society.
I think that's like very great input, and I also somewhat relate to that on a little bit of a lesser level. I also want to ask, what has been your biggest challenge or limitation so far, and has that been influenced maybe by the fact that you're like a woman in tech or business?
So Letters Against Isolation's greatest challenge has been scaling so quickly. And I think that's less of an issue to do with my gender and more one to do with innovating and doing something exciting and new like this. So, you know, one week we'd have way too many volunteers. We'd have to like search for new care homes and new seniors to write to. And then the next week we'd have so many seniors waiting for a letter that we'd have to search for ways to find new volunteers. And that kind of blitz scaling has taught us a lot about entrepreneurship and business, but it was definitely a lot of work and all hands on deck for a few months.
And to add on to that, I would say that given that Shreya and I are a female team, when we started Letters Against Isolation, I think if we had gone out and told people we're going to send 50,000 letters and cards to seniors, people may have said, I don't think that you're capable of doing that. But now that we have achieved that, and we have been able to coordinate these volunteers, people don't question us so much, especially not just by seeing our gender and assuming that we're not capable of doing something. So I would say that.
Yeah, so I mentioned the imposter syndrome that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think one of the things that was most unsettling to me as a scientist was just how quickly things moved. It's very inspiring to see how research can progress very quickly, but you know, all my instincts say slow down. You know, we need to figure this out carefully. We need to review the data carefully, which needs to happen, but also in a way that is very responsive to the needs of getting diagnostics out and making sure that the data is coming out to inform how we respond to the pandemic. Regardless of whether or not governments are listening to that, that's a whole other story. But I found it very difficult to be comfortable with the pace of how things were going. And slowly I started to learn the balance between how to move research very quickly and also to still make the time to be rigorous. And it's always more important to make sure that what you're saying is true and it's validated and you had as many eyes to look at the data before it goes out. Much more so than responding to the pressure of having to move things out. And for me to find my voice, to be assertive about that, took a bit of time because I also didn't feel, just by virtue of being a woman of color, I didn't feel qualified to make those calls initially. But as time moved on, I found, my bearings a little bit more and whenever. And it also happened that the people who were volunteering in the same working group who wanted to push the work to move forward very quickly were men and men in positions of power. So It was very difficult to navigate that dynamic, but eventually I was like, you know what, no. Things have to be done carefully, and also a lot of people were donating their time, you know, and volunteering without any financial compensation, which is also interesting, because if there is that much pressure, there should be resources to actually, you know, finance the effort, which are starting to trickle in, but not at the same pace that people have been pressured to move through the work quickly. And it's very interesting to watch how gendered that entire dynamic has been. But the data integrity and making sure that things move quickly and efficiently, but in a very ethical way and in a way that is true to the science was very important.
To answer your question, I think it's a mix between the other two panelists. One part of the challenges was on scaling. You know, we went from making 50 face shields to 200, and then having a whole team of volunteers, and then major hospitals calling us asking for 10,000 face shields and just overnight. So we needed to stay focused, and intermixed with all of these emails of requests and, you know, I can help, were also people saying, more on the shark end of, we want you to make money from this, and, you know, we can sell you face shields at a cheaper price. And we knew it was unethical. So we needed to stay focused, and all we wanted to do was give this file away for free and have as many people as we can download and have access to critical PPE.
I don't know if we mentioned earlier, but we didn't. So the whole operation was entirely donation based. We put about 30,000 of our own funds into the project. The local community donated about another 30,000, but we didn't see a dime off of the whole project. And it was, I mean, all of these people around the world, we were encouraging them to donate to, you know, if they were able to. And it just, I mean, we had all, as Steph was saying, these people showed up like, hey, we want some of that money. And we're like, well, I don't know what money you're talking about. But that was definitely a challenge.
Yeah. So to answer your question, it's a mix between the two panelists, staying ethical and also scaling.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for your answers, you guys. We can relate. I'm sure everybody else can relate on different aspects. And I think our next question would just be, what aspect of being a female or non-binary or an LGBTQ innovator would you say that most people don't think about, you know, as in challenges, benefits, stereotypes, anything like that in your field?
So I would say that I personally, as a minority belonging to the female and Asian group, I think it's really important to look at other minorities and ways that I can help them. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I noticed that there were a lot of amazing initiatives starting, like delivering meals to healthcare workers or school supplies to students, but there was a really massive gap as well. And that was that there weren't any organizations that I saw that were serving seniors specifically. And I think that they're being really impacted by the pandemic. And so I think that was one of the reasons why starting this organization seemed like such a natural idea for Shreya and I as minorities ourselves. And the community that we have been able to build at Letters Against Isolation is actually also a majority of women. And so creating this community of the women minority to serve another minority, which is seniors, has been a really rewarding process during this pandemic.
I completely agree. But to add on to that, I think as a woman, there's this temptation to hold yourself to this really high standard because that is what society does, right? And so I was reading a study recently, and when confronted with a job posting, women would only choose to apply if they met 100% of the criteria, while men would apply if they just met 60% of them. And so when doing something like this, which is entrepreneurial, it can be really tempting to like wait until everything is perfect and then launch into it and then get started. But that's the thing, it will never be 100% worked out. Nothing will go 100% to plan. And so I think it's really important to capitalize on the moment and trust in your abilities and take action. When building Letters Against Isolation, Saffron and I did think a lot about a lot of how we would structure things and how we would scale, but a lot of stuff was built whilst we were on the proverbial runway. And so having that confidence in yourself is so vital.
Yeah, I completely agree with the last statement. It's interesting because I want to trust my instincts and I want that to be the driving force, but it's very difficult to find a discernment of, what instincts are coming because, I want to do the science properly, and which instincts are socialized, because you're a woman of color and you're always told, wait, and it's not just that we hold ourselves to a high standard. We are actually, statistically speaking, we are held to a higher standard, and we're the first to be let go if we make mistakes at work. So there's a constant anxiety, because there are subtle and sometimes not so subtle microaggressions that we deal with on a daily basis. So having the discernment of, what's real and what's, just socialized from the feedback that we constantly get by virtue of our identities, by our visible identities that people interact with, is really important. And I don't have an answer yet. It's just I'm trying to be a lot more aware of, is my anxiety because of a real thing, or is it because I'm socialized to feel this way in a specific setting and not trust that I have the capability to actually do what I'm tasked to do. It's a constant struggle, but bit by bit I'm becoming more aware and paying more attention to the cues, both from my own body language and from the feedback that I get from my community. And one important thing is to always have a community of women around you, and by women I mean cis, trans, binary, non-binary. It's the main the main issue that happened during COVID is that those communities have been broken up because people are more isolated. They're working in settings where we don't have access to each other, and to have that supportive community. So building even virtual communities of people who share those experiences are very important, and making sure that we have a positive feedback loop that kind of shelters us from the attack that microaggressions would have on our confidence.
So I am one of 7 sisters. And so I grew up in a household of women. And because of that, I know that women are wonderful human beings. And like Sarah was just saying, we need this community. And so my sisters and I are very close. And because of this community that we've made with each other, we lift each other up. And I think that's what we need to keep doing as a society.
One of the things that I think realized early on about the face shields and where they needed to go, on the news, it was like hospitals, and it was like New York City, right? New York City, New York City, New York City. That's all we could hear in March. But very quickly, we started to get contacts through the website from communities that were being totally ignored, that like we never would have thought of. And I think it was sort of a stark realization for us how quickly and easy it is sometimes to, buy into what the media is talking about and not really take a look around. I mean, we got contacted by a lot of agricultural workers, which is a group that nobody was talking about, but if they had to stop their work, I mean, none of us would have been able to eat.
We were contacted by food service and sanitation crews, and a lot of people who are overlooked. And so as a woman and talking about community, we wanted to specifically reach out to these groups and make sure that they got what they needed, either through the 3D printed face shields, or we connected them to people that we personally knew who would make the shields for them. So we contacted them, but then we also made sure that, you know, New York City and these other groups were taken care of as well.
Great, thank you so much. Next, I want to ask, what practical advice would you give to someone who wants to kind of make a change or like take a step in the right direction during the pandemic? And is there any specific mistake that you made that kind of taught you that lesson that you would want to pass on to someone else?
I would say, speaking from our experience with Letters Against Isolation, that the reason why we've been so successful in gaining lots of volunteers is that our idea is very simple. It's very easy and very quick to pick up a pen and a piece of paper and send a letter to a senior. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when Shreya and I were thinking of ways to help our grandma feel less isolated, our ideas were much, much more complicated. And so I think it's important to look at what problems are your members of your community facing, and then also what are they doing to combat those problems, because often you can take their solution to the problem and make it a solution that many people can use outside of what your community is doing. I think it's important also to think creatively, and the solution that you think of originally may not be the best solution, but it's a great first step. And I think also, if you're looking to get volunteers, it's really important to maintain a personal connection with them. And that's something Shreya and I have really strived to do from the beginning. And whether that is just sending them an email to thank them for the letters that they've written, or address the email specifically to their name. And it helps create a personal connection where they feel like they're a member of a community and that they belong to something where we really appreciate them for what they're doing and contributing.
Should I go? I think my advice would be, don't wait until you feel ready. That feeling of arriving at a point where you're ready and you have all the right qualifications and all the right circumstances does not exist. You will be ready as you're doing the work, you know. And we all learn on the job, and that's okay. I think like one of I guess like the biggest pitfalls of the capitalist society that we live in is like, you have to have credentials XYZ before you're qualified to even start an entry position. And a lot of times those are just, you know, they're money grabbing schemes, which I think it's not authentic to say that, because I do have a lot of, you know, 3 university degrees, but in reality, just stepping in to do the work is important. And then that feeling of you're ready and now you're qualified to do the work will come later. But waiting is just a way to stall ourselves and to keep us from thinking big. One thing I read today, actually, which I think is very relevant, is don't waste your time thinking small. Like, don't say, let's do one small thing today because that's what I'm able to do. Think big, have a big vision. The steps might be small, but always have your eye on a big vision. And the people who look towards big visions are not more qualified than any of us. You know, we're just socialized to think that we don't deserve to walk towards that vision, and that's what needs to be broken. In reality, we all, you know, none of us are born ready, and we won't be ready until we're actually in the process of actualizing that vision. So having the vision is important, and trusting that we can walk towards it regardless of our identities and how, you know, the constant messaging that we get from our external environments.
To bounce off of what Sara was saying, our business motto and also our motto in life is do the impossible. So basically, if you take Nike's just do it and elevate it. So we want to do the impossible every single day of our life. Going back to face shield, here's the actual face shield itself. So this part was 3D printed, and we went through several different prototypes, and we like to be very perfect and OCD. And at one point we looked at each other, we were like, we just need to get it out there so other people can do it. We just need to, let it go and make sure other people have it in the world. So we did. And then after a while, we had people who were 3D printing it come back and revise it a little bit. So then we revised it and sent out a new revision. And then, people from Colorado said, why don't we do this? And people from Mexico said, why don't we do this? So we sent out a new revision. And I think that's what we need to do in life, is just do it. Do the impossible. Make sure that, it doesn't need to be perfect. After a while, you can revise and work on it and build upon it. And then, it will be as perfect as it can be. But so just make something, just do it, and then learn from the process.
We have a saying that we always say to each other, because, opportunities will come across the table, and one of us will be sitting there scratching, going, you think we should do this one? And we always say yes is more, and that the more you do, the more you can do. And so if you're out there and you're thinking about how to help, or what your next big idea is, we would just say go for it. Because if you say yes to it, you might not land where you thought you were going, but it's bound to be an awesome place.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's me right there. Do the impossible and just never settle for what, or less than you have the potential to actually achieve or do. So thank you so much for that. How can students get involved in what you do? And if you have any links, feel free to drop them in the chat as well.
So if you're interested in sending letters to seniors, you can just head over to our website, lettersagainstisolation.com, and fill out the bright yellow Get Involved form, which is right at the bottom, at the top of our website. And not only will you be signing up to send letters to seniors, you're also going to be joining a community of individuals who are supporting each other during the pandemic.
Thank you.
I can write my email. But if anyone is in the Boston area and you would like to be involved, or even just learn more about diagnostics and the process that they go through for FDA authorization and then validation before they go into the community, and we can have chats for hours about the politics of all of that and what the test performances actually mean. I'm very happy to chat. So I'll drop my email. And if you are in the Boston area and you're interested in volunteering, please also feel free to send an email. So I'll just drop it on the chat now.
We'll also drop our website, which is bubman.com, and there you'll find ways to access our Instagram, our Facebook. You can send us messages there. You can even send us an email, and you'll find it at bubman.com too. And just a little plug, the printer that you see behind us, we're launching a Kickstarter in just a few weeks, and we want to get it out to as many people as we can, so that you also can print and enjoy this process and be involved in tech and STEAM. So you'll find everything there on Budman.com.
And we are always looking for talented people to work with. And you know, the beautiful thing about working in digital fabrication is whether you have a crazy idea for some kind of invention or a medical device or anything else, we would love to hear it and we'd love to work with you. So, you know, if you have something that you have in mind, or you just think that you might be a good fit to work with us, please reach out. We love working with talented people.
We did actually have one more question, but before that, I think Dr. Suliman posted this earlier. Would you be able to like show us your printer really quick?
Sure.
So we usually do a demonstration with 3D printing where we take a can of whipped cream and we shake it up and we draw a circle. And we'd say that's, you know, two-dimensional printing. And then we just keep drawing circles on top of that. And eventually you end up with a big, delicious whipped cream cylinder. And that's how all 3D printing works, right? It's just this layering process. And so unfortunately, we don't have the can of whipped cream. But this is basically how it works. You have your two dimensions, one up at the top where it moves back and forth. And, you know, just some plastic string gets pulled in there. And then your other dimension is when it comes forwards and backwards.
This way.
And then your last dimension is when this plate comes all the way up and then kind of works its way down. And eventually you end up with an object. And you can probably see the layers if we get it close enough. And that's how all 3D printing works. So that's not just like, this is plastic, but we've done a lot of experiments with food beyond our whipped cream demonstration.
Actual food that you can print and eat. But it seems complicated. It's pretty simple. It's working on the same X, Y, Z that you learned in math. X, Y, and then Z. Those three axes, and then it's just layer by layer by layer, and you make an object. Any object that you want.
Thank you for that quick demonstration. Our last question before we move on to like audience submitted questions is there anything that we, you know, left out in our set of questions or in the discussion that you think really should be addressed? Some like message that you want to put out, or just something that you think maybe we should have talked about that we didn't quite hit yet?
Yeah, I was just going to add that opportunities come at the strangest times, and it's very easy to talk ourselves out of pursuing them. And I'm an advocate of not burning yourself out, but I'm also an advocate of saying yes and maybe drop out later. But it's really interesting how many opportunities we can talk ourselves out of because we're not ready or someone else is more qualified, etc. And a lot of my career progression happened because there was an unexpected opportunity that showed up. And even though it wasn't part of my plan, you know, the fact that it showed up, it was there for a reason. And it was very easy to talk myself out of them. But, you know, I'm just encouraging all the scientists in the room not to talk themselves out of opportunities that do show up. And you can always, if it's not what, you know, what's suitable for you, you can always leave.
One of the lessons that we learned that I just, you know, I think everybody should hear is, you know, we're over here going, wow, did you hear what they did? So, I mean, one of the things that we learned from this whole thing and that the other panelists are just exemplifying is that you're never too small to make an outsized impact. And it's like, you know, all it takes is two sisters with a great idea to change, you know, thousands of people's lives. And, you know, just take the chance on whatever it is and don't think you're too small for it. I mean, it's amazing how many people will help if your idea is there to, you know, improve the livelihood of other people.
Yeah, bouncing off of that, people are kinder than you imagine. I think that's one of the most amazing learnings from this. It's just been incredible to see how powerful our volunteers have been in making a difference, in changing people's lives, in doing something so lovely for someone else. You know, when you look at the news, it's often quite depressing, and you can see the worst parts of humanity. And so this whole endeavor in seeing just the sheer raw power of 4,000 people and what good they can do has just affirmed how great humanity can be.
Could I say one last thing? The unknown may seem like a really scary place. We don't know what's on the other side. And through everything that we do, we go into the unknown, and it might take us a completely different trajectory than we thought we would. And we might take 4 steps back and 2 steps forward, but we're still taking 2 steps forward. So my advice would be believe in yourself and jump into the unknown. You never know what to expect.
Thank you. That is all really great advice. We're going to move on to audience questions now. So I'm just going to say we did have, if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question, that would be great. And while people are continuing to send us in questions in the chat and raising their hand, I wanted to go back to something that Dr. Suliman, you mentioned pretty early on in our discussion about how Black communities are a lot more affected by the virus than others. Just for some background, could you explain maybe like why that is or kind of what we're learning from that?
Yeah, so actually Dr. Anthony Fauci gave a presentation this morning and as part of his presentation, he talked about the social determinants of health. So these are non-biomedical factors that influence whether someone is going to have a worse disease outcome or not. So as of now, the rates that I saw in his slides this morning of Black communities, Native American, and Hispanic communities were 5 times more likely to be hospitalized of severe COVID than white counterparts, 5 times. Even if the rates of the infections are equal, which they're not to begin with, you're more likely to have severe disease just by virtue of your identity. And it's very easy to ascribe that quick, biomedical scientists like to say, well, genetic factors. Well, this is not genetic factors. This is 400 years of systemic racism that led to that. We live in a country where, healthcare provision is still private, communities are segregated. Housing is more dense, intergenerational trauma on top of all of it. And a lot of the essential workers that continued to work when everybody else had the privilege, honestly, of working from home had been communities of color. Because of all of these factors, the rates of infection are much higher. And also once you're infected, you're 5 times more likely to be hospitalized. I don't know if that answered the whole question. Was there a second part?
No, I was just asking maybe to provide a little bit more background. So I think that answered it perfectly. That's like absolutely crazy for me to hear. We have a question from Caitlin. Caitlin, do you want to turn on your mic and answer it? Okay, I will just ask her question. So she was asking, do you think you'd be able to do what you do today if you weren't in your specific location that you live in or just in the US in general?
For us, I think that's the incredible thing about what we're doing. We could do this from anywhere. We started just using the internet and using that power to reach people, both volunteers and seniors. So we could do this anywhere. Like I've left Boston, I'm no longer there with Safi, I'm in St. Louis now, and we're still going strong. And we're also expanding internationally. So we now serve seniors in Australia, Canada, and the UK, as well as the US.
Yeah, and building off of that, we've recently partnered with the Nextdoor app, which we're really excited about to help us expand outside of the US into both the UK and Canada. And we will be partnering with them so that they post about us on their app because they have a huge database of users. And we hope that through that, we're going to have an increased number of international volunteers to help send letters to the care homes that we're going to be serving in both the Canada and the UK.
So I'm actually going to make a controversial comment here. I think we need to give up on this US-centric view of where accomplishments can happen. If there's anything we've learned during the pandemic response, is that the US is not the end-all be-all. In the COVID innovation work that I'm involved in, there's actually a global implementation committee. And the idea behind it was that we from here would help other countries, set up COVID diagnostics projects. And it was a very humbling and necessary experience because we're learning from the international partners. The rural villages in Malawi are doing better than big cities in the US. Like, we just need to be humble about the way that we perceive the US as a center of innovation. Sure, the resources are, because of a lot of historical reasons, there's a lot more resources here, but innovation is happening everywhere around the world. And had we actually listened to other countries outside the US at the beginning of the pandemic, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Is it Dr. Suliman? Is that?
Yes, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So we agree with you 100%. For a long time, we've been manufacturing for 3 years. And early on, we realized just that, our partners were going to be all over the world. And this idea of, made in USA is like something that a lot of people take a lot of pride in. Now, we're a little bit nerdy. We love Star Trek. And so on the back of our products, we very proudly put, made on Earth, because we really believe that the best products are things that come from truly global collaborations. And if we had tried to just do it in the United States, we are 100% positive that it would be an inferior product that we were making. And so we are all about, making sure that if this coronavirus has taught us anything, it's that we're a global society, and we need to start thinking that way and stop thinking about our own little plots of land and treating each other that way.
Wow. I think all those answers were like really crazy. Saffron, did you want to add something on?
I was just going to add that given that we're all isolated to our homes right now, I think that where you're located is irrelevant to this situation, and anybody can pick up a piece of paper and a pen. It's something that everybody has at home to write to a senior. And I think that's what Shreya was saying. It's the beauty of our idea, because it can be done anywhere by anyone, no matter where you are.
Props to that. Our next question is, what advice do you have for something that a couple of you mentioned of building the community of women, or like, do you have any recommendations? I think one example is I personally am part of a women in computing community as part of the National Center for Women in Technology. A lot of people call it NCWIT. And so I think that's a really large community of women in computing that is pretty diverse in terms of people from a lot of different places. And so is there, do you have any recommendations for that and how to kind of start building that while in isolation?
I'll go if you guys don't mind. So I think to go off what I said a little bit earlier is just do it. Just reach out to these communities. Just reach out to people that you follow either on Instagram or Facebook or any sort of social media. Just reach out to them, because there's a lot of people out there just like you who want to be a part of a community. I don't have any specific communities to reach out to, for example, but I would say if you really like this, that, or the other, just reach out, just do it, and see where that takes you.
I am a huge proponent of cold emailing people. So if you can find someone's email address or their LinkedIn and you just send them a message and ask, hey, you're interesting, please can I have coffee or meet you? The success rate is surprisingly high. So I think building a community is a lot less daunting than it can appear from face value.
Yeah. I wish I had more time to join, women in tech groups and things like that, because it does have a lot of value. But I also, with the little social capital that I have now, you know, if you're chairing a committee or a working group, for example, I specifically recruit women and women of color, and make it a point that they are acknowledged. You know, if I'm presenting the work or reporting back, it's like, oh, Bianca, who actually is a member of the working group, did XYZ. And I noticed that, again, like because of the pace of the pandemic, people want to push the work forward without actually stopping to reflect on who's actually doing the labor behind the scenes. And I make it a point to acknowledge that very clearly, and to strategically recruit whenever there is a position, be it a position of power or not, you know, if there are employment opportunities, etc. I try my best to advertise that strategically, you know, among women, among people of color, to make sure that those opportunities are reaching them. And hopefully when I'm in a position to hire my own staff, then I can be a lot more strategic about that as well.
I would say that one thing I've found very important to me is going through this process and learning how to build an organization from scratch is, I've got a lot of knowledge now, and I think it's really important to share that with other people, to help them start their own organizations and help lots of other people. And so during this pandemic, I've reached out to a few other people have reached out to me asking if they have any tips or advice to starting their own similar organizations. And I think it's really important to help those people and give them the advice that you've learned from the experiences that you've had.
Can I quickly add something to what Saffron just said? So, you know, one of the, you know, very glaring statistics that came out of the pandemic is that, you know, societies that are led by women tended to have a much better response than societies that are led by men. I think one thing that we need to interrogate collectively is like what patriarchal styles of leadership have actually done, and not to look at those as a model that we have to emulate, or like, look, you know, I'm not interested in being like, you know, John or Smith or whoever is in power right now. I think just being a woman and being a woman of color, I need to trust my own wisdom and bring that forward as a style of leadership. If my style of leadership is being more cooperative and being more engaging and empathic, I'm a very emotional person. Anybody who knows that I cry very, very easily, you know. That's not something to be ashamed of. Those are actually very important qualities, you know, to bring forward into leadership positions. And sorry, I need to move so that the lights don't go off. Yeah, I think, you know, starting your own organization, you know, sometimes we just wait until, you know, we have XYZ in place, or like try to recapitulate what, you know, a corporation led by men looks like. And those models they're outdated now. Like, it's time for them to fall. Like, I think it's time for a new imagination of what feminine leadership styles actually look like, and bring that forward.
I think that's a great message. Before Marie asks the next question, I just wanted to say, if like someone does want to add on to like the conversation or anything, like we really want this to be like a conversational style of panel. So yeah.
Okay, give me one question. I believe we had a question from Alicia. Alicia, do you want to turn on your mic and ask the question yourself, or? No? Okay, so okay. Her question was, are there any other experiences that you've had with sexism?
Yes. Like, pandemic or not, like, that's a very glaring part of, I'm sorry that I spoke first, but it's just, I saw the question, I was like, yes, of course. I'll give an example from, you know, just a project I had at work, for example. There's a colleague of mine, he's very helpful, white male, and I'm more senior to him. And we've been working together on one project where he had, some background knowledge of a specific technique that I needed to learn in the lab. But it's very interesting how even after I've mastered what I was doing and I was presenting it publicly, people would still be, oh, what do you think? Like look back to the guy. It's like, I'm the expert here. I've been doing this work. So there are many instances like that where, you work and develop the expertise and write the papers and give the presentations. And it's so when it's time to ask the expert questions, they would look, you're right there. They look at your colleague and ask for their opinion. And I learned to be abrupt and still give my opinion even when I'm not asked, which may or may not be helpful all the time. But sometimes people do realize, oh, actually she knows what she's talking about, but it shouldn't be like that in the first place. But those are small microaggressions. There are bigger microaggressions. It takes women much longer to be promoted. It takes women much longer to be acknowledged for the same amount of labor that their counterparts do. And there's always that, regardless of whether or not you have kids, there's that question at the back that you're being penalized for even, just by virtue of your expected gendered roles in society. And yes, we do experience sexism all the time. And, I'm looking forward to hear what others say, because it manifests in a lot of different ways. Some of it is subtle, but a lot of it is not that subtle. Sometimes it's very glaring, like you're being passed over for things that you should be given opportunities for.
To bounce off that, I know that I had mentioned when we go into meetings, when we go into workshops, everyone tends to look at Isaac first. I know that he's attractive and everything, but they tend to ask him and look at Isaac first. So to go off Dr. Suliman's point, I have also been more abrupt and a little bit more demanding because I know things too. I'm also an expert here. They need to hear my opinion. So, like you were saying, there's a lot of microaggressions and there's a lot of sexism that takes place. We need to change that, and we need to take a stand and show that we are who we are, and we know things as well.
I actually remember one contract we passed up on because of sexism. We've been working with a manufacturer who did sheet metal, and we had a series of meetings in their client room, and it's sort of standard for us to ask to have a tour of the plant before we do anything. And so we asked for the tour of the plant, and we were looking and we were all ready to sign, and then we saw some very sexually suggestive pinups all over one of the rooms. We took one look at each other, we thanked them for their time, and we ended up ending the contract right there because it's just not the culture that we wanted to support. And I mean, there are other sheet metal manufacturers out there who don't have cultures like that, who we will happily work with. Mm-hmm. But that was sort of the big red flag for us, that these aren't people we wanted to do business with. And so I think, for us, it's always about making sure that the people that we are working with have, proper ethical and moral guidelines out there, and are treating people the way that we want to treat people, regardless of, identity, that everybody should be treated, with respect and dignity, and that sort of culture just isn't the sort of thing that we choose to support. And so, in that case, we did it with our money, and I think there's lots of small ways to do that too, and we're always trying to make sure we're doing that.
Well, even with this panel, I know that it's a women-based panel, and for you guys to accept Isaac into this panel is wonderful, and for him to hear your stories is also wonderful.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is great. This is awesome.
I think Safi and I are a bit earlier on in our careers, so we might not have experienced quite as much of sexism yet. That said, I am hopeful that you know, with all this push for feminism in the media, in mainstream culture, I think men are much more aware of like their role to play as advocates for women. So my bosses have all advocated on my behalf. They've all made sure that I am part of the conversation and that I'm not overlooked because of my gender. So I've been lucky in that sense. That said, again, you know, being the only woman at 3 different companies, there is the feeling that you have to justify why you're there, that to show that you do belong and that you do fit in and you're every bit as good as your male counterparts. And so I think that could be a socialized thing that I've learned as a woman in society. And so trying to overcome that and to believe that that isn't something that I necessarily have to do, that the only person I owe anything to is myself, has been a journey.
I would say that as a person who's very passionate about STEM, as I've gotten into high school, I've noticed that there are fewer and fewer girls in my science classes and math classes as I take more advanced classes. And I think that it's easy to see that as something that I should be discouraged by and maybe say I don't belong in these classes. But I look at that as a challenge or something to encourage me to be the first person to do something, or even to encourage my other friends to take those classes. So there are more girls in our computer science class or my math class. So I think it's really important not to look at something where you walk into a room and you're the only girl in the room, to look at that as something that's a negative, but to look at that as an opportunity to bring more female people into that field or that classroom.
I think that's like really great. All of your guys' experiences have been really great so far to hear. We did have an audience question. Ukamaka, do you want to turn on your mic and ask?
Yes. So I want to ask what advice you would give for someone who wants to make an impact but is limited by the lack of financial compensation.
So I can go if that's okay. I would say that a lot of the platforms that Shreya and I have been using are free until you have a large number of volunteers. And I would take advantage of that. We operated for maybe the first 3 or 4 months of our organization just paying for the monthly domain fee for our website. But we were able to use services such as MailChimp and HubSpot to email a large number of people by just sending one email with a personalized name or fields. But we could use that for free until we had over 3,000 volunteers. And so I would really take advantage of the fact that those platforms are free and they can save you a lot of time and they can also really help you grow your organization.
I think another way to think about it is by keeping things simple and looking into your home community. When we first started Letters Against Isolation, we reached out to 4 homes nearby, 4 homes that we felt that we could support ourselves. Of course, you know, we kind of underestimated how many seniors we'd be serving, but starting small and laying strong foundations is a good way to start something important and meaningful to the people who it serves without breaking the bank.
To add to something Shreya said earlier about, you know, the kindness, don't underestimate the kindness of people. It's sort of stunning that when you have an idea that can make an impact and help a lot of people, just how many people will come out of the woodwork to help in any way they can. You know, for some people, that means time and labor. For other people, they're willing to give you, willing to help the cause out of the kindness of their hearts, and they open their wallets to help that situation. So, you know, if finances are the only thing holding you back, the best thing I think you could do is put your idea out there and start to organize and work off of what you have. And if it's one of those things that's going to make an impact, you'll find a way. People will come out of the woodwork and sort of show up and help you advance that cause. But don't let finances be the thing that stops you.
Kamaka, great question. I just wanted to clarify, do you mean like having financial resources to advance your idea, or do you mean your compensation for you yourself?
I meant compensation.
Okay, good, because I actually I wrote this down before the panel, and I was like, I need to make this point very clearly. Like this whole idea of volunteering to advance your career, I think it has an expiry date. Your labor is worth money. There are paid opportunities, and I think like as women, as people of color, like we're sometimes we come with this attitude that we're so grateful for anyone giving us any opportunity, even, and we're willing to work for free, you know, just to advance our careers. And in reality, like even being on the other side of you know, training volunteers or training staff, I take the staff a lot more seriously than I take the volunteers. It shows, it forces the employer, it forces the person that you're working with to actually take you seriously and to respect your labor. And there is money that, and if people want to exploit your labor, then you know, that's not someone that you want to work with to advance your career anyway. I mean, I do understand that right now under the pandemic situation, you know, there aren't as many opportunities, especially for early career and college graduates as there used to be before. This is hopefully a temporary situation, but in general, you know, you can get into a loophole of just, you know, going from one volunteer position to another volunteer position, waiting for that breakthrough, or someone promising you that maybe after 3 months of giving your labor for free, they're going to give you your job. No, like your labor is worth way more than that. And employers know that, and they capitalize on people feeling like they're not adequate enough to have paid positions.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we're just going to ask one last quick question before we wrap it up, because it is nearing the end of our scheduled time. So I guess our last question is, in your specific field or your project, what do you kind of envision it going to in the future, either as like COVID continues or as it hopefully starts to, fingers crossed, starts to die down? And, you know, are you planning to maybe continue this project and shift it into something else, or kind of like what are your thoughts on what will happen with that?
So senior loneliness existed before the pandemic, and it's going to continue afterwards. It affects, I think, 40% of seniors around the country. And so that is a huge amount of people who are feeling lonely and who may appreciate a letter. So Safin and I are going to work very hard to continue to grow. Beyond that, we're looking at moving internationally and reaching out to seniors in our home country of London, but also in Australia, Canada, and we've got a big volunteer base in India, which is quite interesting, so maybe there as well. And then we're also looking into ways to make our letters more personal. So we are starting like a birthday card brigade, where we are asking the homes we work with, hey, do you have any birthdays this month? And organizing our volunteers to write those cards.
I can go next. Yeah, so one of the things I've learned from, I mean, my work is intricately right now related to the pandemic. So when the pandemic is over, I have to move on to something else. And the pandemic will be over. So one of the things that really struck me, you know, I worked in TB for 7 years, even before the pandemic started, and just seeing how little resources were allocated to that. I mean, TB is an ancient disease that's been with us forever. The only licensed TB vaccine, BCG, has been around for 100 years, and there's nothing else that has been licensed since then. TB, before COVID, was the #1 killer from infectious diseases worldwide. And just to see, you know, the virus, the coronavirus was sequenced and isolated for the first time January 2020, sorry. We're now in September 2020. There's over 100 vaccine candidates in different stages of testing, 100. And we're working on one TB vaccine. There are multiple TB vaccines that are in different stages of testing right now, but only one has been approved. So what I'm hoping to learn from, or to take with me from this COVID period is just looking at how science can move so quickly. What were the toolkits? What were the structures that were put in place? What strategies did scientists have to tackle any infectious disease, and then move that toolkit somewhere else? So when the HIV pandemic started, that's actually the system that people used to model response to other infectious diseases. But it seems like unless that sense of, urgency, we're in a pandemic, we're in a crisis, those systems don't develop and don't come together. And human life is not important until there's a sense that it's going to affect everybody in society. I'm hoping that, first of all, that's one lesson that will break, is that, bacteria and viruses know no borders, first of all. And then secondly, what systems were put together so quickly that we can transfer now to other infectious diseases so that the response is more equitable and sustainable.
When we were sitting down to lunch and we got all of those responses, like I had mentioned earlier, our phones and our computers blew up with emails. And it was from all of these people that wanted to help, and all of these people who were requesting face shields. And all of these people who wanted to help, like we said earlier, were people with 3D printers, or moms with their kids at the table, or librarians, or your next door neighbor. People who have never touched a 3D printer before. And so COVID really showed us the impact of 3D printing, and having 3D printers in the hands of everyone can really make a huge effort. And the second point is, when big companies couldn't fulfill all of these orders, when big companies didn't step up, regular people did. And it really showcased this humanity.
For us, it's sort of become a mission of ours to continue to develop what we might call the civilian core of makers, because we just think that as Dr. Suliman pointed out, the pandemic will end, but it's not the last crisis we'll face. And if we can continue to have civilian responses, ready with their 3D printers to make whatever needs to be made on demand, that's something that we think is important going towards the future, and something we'll continue to work towards.
And as Shreya mentioned, we're looking to continue to expand as much as we can, whether that's through serving seniors in different countries, or just continuing to expand our community of volunteers. And so one thing that we're working on is building more platforms for our volunteers to interact with each other. And currently we have a monthly Zoom party where volunteers can get together and interact, share ideas with each other and with us. And so we really love meeting our volunteers in these platforms, and we want to do more of that because it's such an amazing way to interact with people in this time where a lot of people are isolated to their homes. And we're also just, we have a weekly blog where I post on our blog and talk about the seniors who we serve. I interview some of them, as well as spotlight on some of our volunteers. And so it's really important to us to foster this community of volunteers that we've created and make sure that they keep on feeling like they belong to something.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think the questions. Does anybody else have any question? We have about 5 minutes left. If not, then I guess we can just wrap up. Or Maria, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say a huge thank you to all the panelists. I also did want to shout out the organizations that helped us put this together. So I am from an organization called GirlsComputingLeague, which is related to getting more women empowered and into STEM. And Marie, you can also talk about SWE, Society of Women Engineers at GMU, but also Panel to the People, which is a big group of students actually who put out a lot of panels. And as like part of our whole, all three of us, people worked really, really hard to make this come together, and the panelists as well were super, super great. So huge thank you to you guys as well. I learned so many things today as well, which you think like as the moderator of a panel, it's like I wouldn't, but I really was just learning so much. And a last note to all of the attendees, we will be emailing out the whole recording of the panel, as well as some links to both the panelists' information, as well as some other organizations as well that are kind of related to what we talked about in today's panel. Marie, any last words?
No, you said it all. Thank you so much to everyone. Everybody who attended. The questions were great. Thank you for sharing your experiences and giving us your links, how to contact you or how to get involved with you. She mentioned I'm part of SWE, which is the Society of Women Engineers at the George Mason chapter, George Mason University. We work pretty much just trying to build a strong community of women, especially in STEM, but more specifically in engineering. I myself am a mechanical engineer, so yeah, we're looking to growing our community and strengthening it as well. But yeah, thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you to Maria and Marie. You guys were wonderful moderators, and thank you for having us along for this ride, and for having Isaac here as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us. I wish I could see people's faces because I feed off people's energy, but this has been a really great discussion. I really appreciate the invitation. Hopefully we can continue this conversation.
Oh, everybody's here. Hi everyone.
Oh, hi everyone.
If everyone wants to turn on their video right now, I think now is like a great time.
That'll be great.
As well, if you guys want.
No pressure.
I'd like to just echo that. Thank you so much for having us. I've learned a lot. I had a great time, and this was a wonderful event. So thank you for inviting us.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you as well. We're really honored that you asked us to speak at this panel today, and I really enjoyed learning about the other two organizations. Thank you.
Great. I think that is a good place to wrap up. If we want to just pause here for like 10 seconds, everyone can turn on their cameras and smile. I will take a quick picture screenshot. 1 second. 3, 2, 1. Oh, sorry, hold on. 3, 2, 1, go. Great. I think we got it. It was so great to meet the panelists, and thank you everyone for coming. I think that we're good for today.
We're good. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.